Hi, I'm James McGuire, and on today's eSpeaks, we're looking at a new report that details the state of cloud computing. The report covers multi-cloud, cloud spending, cloud security. It's a full portrait. Plus, there are interesting numbers about the horse race between AWS and Azure, really surprising numbers. To dig into all that, I'm joined by Brian Adler, Senior Director, Cloud Market Strategy at Flexera. Brian, happy Friday to you, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much, James. It's a pleasure to be here. And I and my Flexera colleagues always appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. So thank you.
Great, great. It's interesting. I have to admit, I look forward to this report every year. It's a fascinating report. And I thought, am I that much of a cloud nerd that actually look forward to the Flexera report? I mean, tell me that I'm not the only one out there.
You are by far not the only one. It is one of the reports, obviously, that we get requested. It comes out usually around every March-ish timeframe, and we're getting pinged from folks in usually January, February. Hey, when is it coming? When is it coming? That kind of thing. So we hear from all different media outlets and the press and journalists. They really look forward to this report. Over the 11 years, this is our 11th year doing it. It's really gained a lot of traction, and it has sort of become the de facto standard, if you will, as far as reporting on the state of the cloud.
So I want to do a screen share in a moment and look at some of the individual pages from the report. I think there's some fascinating numbers in there. But before even that, what surprised you overall about the report? Really stood out, or what's particularly noteworthy in your view?
Yeah. So what I had one of those, forest versus the trees kind of things when I first looked at it, right? I looked at it and I was actually looking at the symptom and not the cause. So the symptom that I looked at first, I said, hey, we're looking at challenges. We always ask about challenges every year. And lack of skilled resources in helping folks with their cloud journey has always been, number 5 or 6 kind of thing, in the 60 to 70% of folks responded. This year it made an 8% jump. And an 8% jump is a fairly significant when you're talking about over 750 respondents. And I said, why was this year so different? Why did it jump from 5th place to 2nd place? And I said, well, that's really interesting. And then I took that step back and looked at the forest, and I realized that the SMBs, the small to mid-sized businesses, the folks that are, 1,000 employees or less, had made an incredible increase in the amount of spend, and therefore, the workloads they were running in the cloud. Last year, 38% of the SMBs said we're spending 100K a month or more, 1.2 million per year. This year, that 38% went to 53, a 15% jump. So anything over 5 is usually pretty significant. The 15% jump we rarely see. So I went, the lack of resources makes sense now, right? We've got these SMBs that are flocking more and more to the cloud, and the talent pool is expanding, but not as rapidly as the need for that talent pool. And therefore, these SMBs are really struggling to find folks to help them. So that's what jumped out at me, yeah.
Yeah, no, well then bottom line, mom and dad, tell your child to major in cloud studies in college. It sounds like it's the profitable career for the future.
I would say any young person coming out of school, I think you really can't go wrong with like getting your AWS certification, your Azure certification, GCP. Definitely look into containers and Kubernetes. Those aren't going anywhere anytime soon.
All right, let me do the miracle of screen share. If I can technically pull this off, I'm going to be impressed with myself. And we're going to take a look at the report. So this is right in the middle of the report. I find this fascinating. We're talking about multi-cloud remains the de facto standard. I don't think we're surprised by that, but I think the numbers are pretty dramatic. 89% multi-cloud, 9% of folks are doing a single public cloud. And then there's that 2% that have a single private cloud. They're pretty 2012, those folks. But I've also seen almost even more dramatic figures about the multi-cloud. I thought one report says down to only 3% of companies aren't using multi-cloud. But the bottom line here is multi-cloud is clearly it is the standard at this point.
Absolutely. And we've seen that really from day one. I mean, way back 11 years ago, when we first started this as the RightScale State of the Cloud report, RightScale got acquired by Flexera in 2018. So it's the same report, folks. It's just the 11th iteration of it. That number was like 67%. And that's continually grown from 67 to the 89 that you see now. So even, 10, 11 years ago, folks were still looking at this multi-cloud approach as the approach that they wanted to take going forward in their cloud strategy.
And who are those folks that are using one single private cloud in 2022? I mean, they're good companies, I'm sure, but like, what do you think is going on there?
What I think is going on there is probably almost certainly VMware, right? And we still have a lot of folks out there. And prior to I should mention the folks out there listening in, prior to my gig here at Flexera, I was an analyst over at Gartner. So I talked to a lot of folks about their cloud computing journeys, a lot of SMBs, a lot of large corporations. And many of these folks were, I don't want to say stuck in their ways, but they've done the same thing the same way for decades. There were some folks I talked to that have been in the same role for 20, 30 years, and they were all on VMware, and they knew exactly how, if something broke at 4 a.m, you could wake them up and they knew exactly where to go to fix it, right?
Yep.
So they were very, very comfort. So I think it's really boils down a lot of times to a comfort issue. This is what I know. This is what I love. This new cloud thing, it looks cool, but it's a little bit too new for me, and I'm not ready to make that switch.
Yep, I totally understand that. Let's go a little further. Page 27 here in the report, I thought was quite interesting. It says it paints an interesting picture. So 27 is one more. Okay, very good. This is interesting. So data in the cloud. So all data stays in premises. Most data stays on premises. What does this mean to you in terms of the relationship between data and the cloud?
Well, this is another area that we've seen grow over time, right? It used to be that, everyone was very reticent to put their data in the cloud from a security perspective. And I get it, right? Security should always be top of mind. I don't know if we're going to look at challenges later, but it's always a top challenge. For 10 of 11 years, security has been the top challenge. And it should always be top of mind for folks, regardless if you're in an on-prem environment or if you're in the cloud. So as companies have become more and more comfortable and aware of the security processes and mechanisms and how they can implement that in the cloud, we're seeing more and more data. We're seeing financial institutions that used to be very hesitant to put stuff in the cloud are now moving into the cloud. Healthcare organizations where their personally identifiable information and their HIPAA information, we're seeing them become more and more comfortable with the cloud. So we're seeing this continual push to the cloud for all types of data, where in the past it was, just the non-sensitive stuff was the only things folks were feeling comfortable with.
Do you think that, I know that some of those financial institutions and the healthcare companies, they couldn't do it literally for compliance reasons. Maybe they even wanted to. Is it the technology that's allowing it, or are they somehow able to work with compliance issues that weren't there before?
Both, right? So basically, if you look at an AWS and Azure and GCP, they all have a compliance page, and they're just clicking off those badges, right? They've got FedRAMP and FISMA, HIPAA, PCI, all they're achieving all these compliance badges, regulation, accreditations, if you will. So that's sort of the first check mark for a lot of these chief security officers. Hey, I can't go anywhere unless they're accredited for this particular XYZ. Hey, they have XYZ. Now I can start to look at this as a viable solution. And then they start to look at the security controls that are in place, and they realize, hey, these are just as strong as they're different, right? How I do things in the cloud is different, but the controls are just as strong as the ones that I've been historically using in my on-prem environment. And they become much more open to be able to move that data into the public cloud.
This next page talks about cloud migration challenges, and I think that is a big problem facing companies. Understanding app dependencies, assessing technical feasibility, choosing the best instance. What do you see in terms of what does this page tell you about the challenges about cloud migration?
It tells me that people are thinking about exactly the right things. It really, really does. So for example, understanding app dependencies, gone are the days, or at least I hope gone are the days, or almost gone are the days of those big, huge monolithic apps where all the code and all the data lives in this one big, huge blob, and it moves as one big, huge blob. Folks started to realize
microservices, in other words. Is it about the rise of microservices?
Well, not just that, but even just breaking them out into components, right? And then microservices is the next iteration of that. But absolutely, but just the point of breaking out this application into multiple components gives me more resiliency, more elasticity, more scalability, allows me to do more things that I hadn't been able to do before. But that's all goodness. But the badness, if there is one, is that I don't know where all the bits are anymore, right? I don't know where all the bodies are buried, or whatever the right phrase is. So if I want to move this to the public cloud, if I move this piece, do I need to move all these pieces? Am I going to break something? Is there going to be latency now introduced that's not acceptable? Those kinds of things. So that's that app dependency. How are they all tied together? And then the assessing technical feasibility is things like, is this even possible to move to the cloud? The example I used to give back in the day was, hey, if you have an app that's JBoss and you're using multicast, you can't do multicast in the public cloud. You just cannot move that app as is. So you're going to need to refactor that application if you want to move it. So you need to understand the dependencies, and then from a technical feasibility, can I even move this to the cloud? Does the cloud support the technology that I'm using for this application? And then obviously the other ones are usually around cost, right? How much is this going to cost versus where I was? How do I find the right instance size for this particular application? Those kinds of things, yeah.
Cool. Moving along, you see on page 31 here, I love this particular one. This is the cloud, the plans the company set for cloud. So top cloud initiatives across all organizations. Interesting. Number one at 59% is optimizing existing use of cloud. Really, it's about cloud saving. So it's, price is one of the things obviously the companies are thinking about the most.
Mhm.
What do you think is key here?
Well, what's interesting is that for the sixth year in a row, that's number one, right? For the sixth
Hmm.
year in a row, the optimizing the existing use, i.e., trying to achieve cost savings, has been the number one initiative, and that's going to be. I don't see that changing anytime soon, right? Folks are always looking at the bottom dollar, always trying to find ways to save money as they move to the cloud. What I
Sure.
did find interesting this year, though, is if you look at the third one there, move from on-premise software to SaaS, that used to
Hmm.
be buried. I don't remember the exact number, 5, 6, 7 down the list. Made a huge jump this year to third place, and I think that
Hmm.
as more and more vendors are starting to offer SaaS offerings for their solutions, and more of these, customers are going, well, wait a minute, I can use this, the particular HR system out in the cloud and not have to manage the infrastructure and do the care and feeding and backup and patching and maintenance of that.
Hmm.
Well, shoot, yeah, why wouldn't I use that thing? So more and more clients are starting to look at SaaS as an offering, as an option for this classic on-prem, not my software that I've had to run just to maintain my business.
Well, and then right beneath that at 40%, progressing on a cloud first strategy, I'm going to sort of interpret that as the adoption of cloud native. Cloud native. Do you see cloud first and cloud native as synonyms or not necessarily?
Not necessarily, but I mean, for Greenfield, yes, this is what it means, right? Hey, I've got a new app. We're going to put it in the cloud unless there's a compelling reason not to, unless there's a mandate. The data for this app shall not leave these four walls. Okay, sorry, that can't go to the cloud, right? But for anything else, Greenfield, absolutely. But from a cloud first strategy, it also can be, hey, this gear is end of life. It's time to do something else with it. Well, let's refactor this thing and move it to the cloud. Let's look at cloud first for any new or existing application that we need to move. And if there's a reason we can't, then we fall back to non-cloud.
Mhm. Page 38, I thought was quite fascinating. It talks about managed service providers,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the things that tells me is leveraging MSPs to manage public cloud resources for all organization. I mean, one of the things I interpret here is that, of course, companies need help. They need a
Mm-hmm.
helping hand. What do you take from this graphic?
Yes, this is interesting. As you see, the 31 and the 26, so over 50% are using them in some regard, right? In some
Right.
regard, they're leveraging MSPs. And I think
Yep.
this kind of ties in with the first thing we are talking about, that lack of skilled resources, right? These
Right.
folks are struggling with that. So this is a great way to fill that gap, right? Hey, I don't have these skilled resources. Let me bring in this MSP. And either I get hooked on this MSP and they end up doing that for me going forward, or I often call it the old, rising tide raises all ships. Bring in this MSP with this very knowledgeable folks, surround them with smart folks who want to learn this, have them look over their shoulder, and you're going to see the whole level of expertise within your organization grow very, very quickly, much more quickly than it would had they been off doing AWS certification exams in the evenings and things like that.
Hmm. Would you expect this number to keep on rising, or think it's reached close to peak MSP?
That is a great question, and we had an internal discussion exactly about that. As this, if when the skills gap closes, I would envision this will go down, but until that happens, I envision this will remain or will continue to increase slightly.
And not to go too far in the weeds in this question, but I think one of the problems might be is that cloud itself is going to continue to be more and more complex. And so the skills gap is sort of this race that more and more people getting involved in getting the skills, but then the skills themselves are more complex. So who wins that race? Well, we'll see, I guess.
We will see exactly.
Page 40, I thought was something really interesting. Let's see. Page 40 is challenges. Top challenges, cloud challenges for all organizations. Security is number one. Again, lack of resources. We talked about that is number two, but people are concerned about cloud security.
And like I said, it's always near the top. And actually, in the 11 years, security has been number one 10 of the 11 years. And the 1 year it wasn't one, it was number two by 2%, right? So it's always up there. And it should be, right? And I kind of look at challenges not necessarily as I can't do this or it's difficult to do this, but oftentimes it's this is different how I do this, right? I don't, the cloud can be as or more secure than my existing environment, but how I do this is different, right? I'm used to using my on-prem gear and my Palo Alto networks devices, things like that. And all of a sudden, I don't have those anymore. I don't have those things to fall back on. I need to still secure my environment, and the tools are here, but they're different. And that's the challenging bit. I have to learn how to use these new tools.
The funny thing about cloud security, as I see it, is that the cloud providers themselves are secure. I mean, we don't hear
Mm-hmm.
about breaches for Azure or AWS really. I think there was one sense, years ago, like, oh, we can't put this stuff up there because there might be a breach there. But correct me if I'm wrong. Big breaches in the large providers, that not really. But Still, of course, the companies are in charge of their own security. So is it the question of they themselves can't quite deploy securely to this very secure thing? What's going on? Why is cloud security such a challenge?
You're exactly right. Again, it's the how I'm doing this differently kind of thing, right? The cloud providers all talk about the shared responsibility model, right? The shared responsibility model being that me, the cloud provider, is going to make sure that I have man traps in place, so no one's going to go in and physically touch your gear. I'm going to have biometrics at the door. I'm going to have, you know, security around the perimeter. I'm going to make sure that the physical assets that are running your virtual assets are secure. It is your responsibility from a technology perspective to make sure that folks don't get access to your data, to your applications. I'm going to give you the tools to do that, but you have to go ahead and use those tools wisely. You know, I'm going to give you a full toolbox. You can either build a shack or you can build the Taj Mahal, but that is up to you how you build it, if you will. And that's the challenge, right? Learning how to use those tools to build that Taj Mahal, if you will.
This is slightly off track, so tell me if we're going too far off track. But I think one of the issues in the overall market is I see the large hyperscalers becoming more and more competent and skilled at security themselves in terms of they're almost security vendors, and Microsoft is actually a cybersecurity vendor. And of course, there's standalone cybersecurity vendors. And so we're sort of like, there's a bit of a race. Who's going to be the cybersecurity vendor of the future? Would it be the hyperscalers themselves, or would it be a standalone companies? I realize we're off track, but do you have a view on that one, or what's your sense?
I do. I mean, my impression would be, you know, I don't think that the AWS and Googles of the world necessarily want that to be what, you know, who they are when they grow up, if you will.
Right.
I think that's something that are going to always be leveraging other organizations to do for them. And now there might be some acquisitions in that space. There already was with Google. They acquired one recently to assist with their security posture. I think that's what we're going to continue to see. But, you know, there's folks that are really, really good at the security aspect. And I think that the providers probably are going to want to maintain that relationship, if you will.
That sounds pretty correct in my view. Let's go to page 47. We're talking about money. It's a topic we never really get away from. Okay, so respond self-estimates of wasted cloud spend for all organizations. That's a hot topic with 32% self-estimated waste spend. That's kind of a heartbreak, huh?
Well, it is, and it's in the State of Cloud report, like I mentioned, this is the 11th year. We've asked the same question every year, and I envision we're going to ask it every year going forward because it's really curious to see. Every year it bounces around 30%. The lowest it's ever been is 28. The highest it's ever been is 33. And this isn't an official number. This is a, hey, Mr. Respondent, what's your gut tell you? What do you think you're wasting? And I think that folks come out with about 30% because I know I'm wasting a lot. And that's a pretty big number, but it's not like 80% where it's going to, you know, bring the wrath of, you know, the entire department down upon me. So but what we've seen in, you know, back in the RightScale days when I was there, we're working on our product called Optimal, which eventually became the CCO product within Flexera, is that usually the waste is higher. It's usually 35 to 40%. And with newer organizations, right, you're new to the cloud and you don't know how to do things the cloud way yet, we oftentimes will see wasted spend at 50% or more because they just don't know the cloud way of doing things yet. So this is going to continue to be an issue for everyone, particularly as you get new to the cloud. As you've been there a while and you get the reps under your belt and you get some iterations and you get experience, you get better at it, as with anything. But when you first get there, there's usually pretty rampant waste.
So this next page, I think, is it's kind of the real hot button. It's discount types used by a cloud provider. It's not exactly AWS versus Azure. We'll get there in a moment, but this shows a very neck and neck in terms of AWS and Azure for the discount type. So Azure's coming along strong.
Yes, but the bigger takeaway that I had from this, and I'm glad you brought this one up, I don't know where you're going to go here, but is that what bums me out looking at this is how little utilization these are seeing. Right, folks, there is ways to save money out there and you're not taking advantage of it, right?
Okay.
So what I would say to folks is that, for example, if you're an AWS, I'm going to pick AWS because of savings plans. If you're an AWS user of any reasonable, consistent usage and you're not using savings plans, you're leaving money on the table, right? It is brain dead simple to use savings plans. Kudos to AWS for making it very easy. Reserved instances are still a little bit challenging. They're not as challenging as they were. Back in the day, 10 years ago, we used to make a joke at RightScale. We would say, to do AWS reserved instance planning, you needed a PhD in economics and a Ouija board. You had to understand complex financial modeling and you had to predict the future, right? So fortunately, it's got a lot easier. But savings plans, brain dead simple. But the really interesting takeaway for myself here was that folks are not using these, right? You've got those discount coupons in your pocket and you're at the register. Pull them out of your pocket. You know, don't let them go unused.
Cool. Moving along to that's 52. There's a pretty cool chart about containers and what's going on in the container market. Yeah, container use by all respondents. Now, this tells me that the AWS product actually has a slight edge in the container tool market, which I'm
Yeah.
mildly surprised at.
Yeah, and this is one of the other interesting takeaways this year, and not just for container tools, but for the configuration management and orchestration tools. This is the first year where we've seen the native provider tools overtake the cloud agnostic tools, if you will. AWS
Mm.
ECS, the Elastic Container Service, and EKS,
Mhm.
Elastic Kubernetes Service, as you can see, is taken over from native Kubernetes. Now, this is a very dynamic survey, right? We basically use it, we evolve it each year. So we're going to evolve this next year to dig a little bit deeper into the Kubernetes use. Most of the folks, I hope, that are using Kubernetes are probably doing that in the on-prem environments, right? Because you can't run
Mm.
EKS, for example, there. But if you're in AWS, EKS makes it, again, brain dead simple to use that word. AKS and Azure makes it very simple to use. So it makes sense that folks are using these tools. Yes, I want to remain agnostic, but man, these things are so shiny and easy. They make my life so much, they remove operational burden. I don't have to become an expert in all the bits that I used to have to be. I can just
Mhm.
use them, right? So even though I'm now maybe locking in a little bit or whatever, getting the handcuffs a little tighter, I'm
Mhm.
willing to do that because of the operational burden that it removes from my organization.
Yep. One last chart. I think it's kind of like the one for me that was mildly shocking in the whole thing. It's been page 61.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of good stuff in this report. It's fascinating
I
stuff.
don't know the page number, so I'm always excited to see what you pull up here.
So this is a big so public cloud provider adoption rates for all organizations. Wow. Azure
Mm-hmm.
there leading AWS. Call me shocked.
Yes, and over the last 11 years, we've seen slowly Azure chipping away at the 800-pound gorilla in the room, right? Slowly chipping away at the lead that AWS has had, particularly in the last 5 or 6 years. Prior to that, 2000, maybe 10, 11, 12, something like that, Azure had what they called ASM, or Azure Service Manager, which, no offense to the Microsoft folks that might be listening in, that was limited use cases in that regard. They then came out with ARM, Azure Resource Manager, which is the current version. That's an awesome product, right? And that is an awesome product. They've continued to evolve it. They've continued to mature it. They've got a great enterprise sales team. Obviously, I almost look at Microsoft Technologies as like a Trojan horse, right? Almost everybody's using Windows or there's some sort of
Sure.
Microsoft in there. So it's fairly easy for the enterprise sales guy to come in and say, hey, why don't you try Azure? This kind of thing. But
Mhm.
between the maturity and the quality of the product, and then the ability for them to execute on the sales side, we've seen them slowly gaining year over year. And this is the first year where Azure has actually surpassed AWS in terms of adoption.
And on a similar note, clearly Oracle Cloud Infrastructure is coming on stronger. There was a time when it seems like Oracle wasn't as concerned or focused on the cloud, but it's very much these days. Is that a jump up from last year?
Yes, and you bring up another one of the interesting ones, right? If we had, you asked about what I found interesting. What I found interesting here, actually, would you mind scrolling down to I believe
Sure.
it's the very next one. So there's
Here you go.
Oracle here's Oracle year over year for all organizations. You
Right.
see it at pretty flat. Scroll to the next one if you don't mind. I'm asking you to go
Sure.
to look at the
Definitely.
next few.
Yep.
Yep.
One more. Yep.
Oh, sorry. I believe, did I go the wrong direction? So we had, sorry, I
You
was
want to go
looking for a
up?
different,
So right here we're year-over-year public cloud provider adoption rates.
for all organizations. I was looking for the one for enterprise and or SMBs. But the
The,
point being is that it might be below, I'm not sure. But for enterprises, we saw, here we go. So here you see for the enterprise, you saw a decrease 5%, right, from 32 to 27. Go to the next one if you don't mind. I believe the next one is
sure.
SMBs.
Aha.
Yeah,
Yes, it is. Yes.
yes, SMBs. The SMBs actually went from 15 to 28% or something like that. The point being is
Wow.
that we saw OCI usage by the SMBs increase dramatically and decrease slightly in the enterprise, and that was very surprising to
Oh.
me because from again going back kind of my analyst days, I was following OCI very closely, and it was the only place where you can run Exadata in the public cloud. OCI, the only place you can do that. As anyone out there is, I'm about to say the statement, I'm sure going to nod your head if you're using Exadata. It's very expensive, right? It is an awesome product, but it is very expensive. I don't know that many SMBs that have the pockets to do Exadata. So what are these SMBs using OCI for? I'm very curious about that. I would have expected enterprise adoption to remain flat or grow slightly in OCI, and SMBs not to grow at all. But SMB usage of OCI almost doubled. I'm very curious to keep an eye on that to see if that's some sort of weird anomaly in the data this year or if that's a trend that continues.
So I'd love to get your sense. The report is fascinating stuff and really interesting. Your sense of what the report says about the future. I know the report is a current snapshot, so it doesn't necessarily predict the
Yeah.
future. But in your personal view, what do some of these statistics say about where we're going with cloud?
No, that's a great question. And one of the things I will kind of pat our own backs here in regards to the report that we've done from year one is we've asked not just what are you using, but what are you planning to use and what are you experimenting with, right? Because plan to use tends to lead to experimentation, and successful experimentation obviously leads to use. So we kind of use the old Wayne Gretzky analogy, right? You know, Wayne, why are you so good? Well, I skate to where the puck's going, not where it is,
Right.
right? So we
Right.
kind of see where the puck is going. And where I think the puck is going here in regards is that we're going to continue to see Azure usage increase, because again, the offering is great and they've got a great sales force, and more enterprises are using their enterprise agreements to, you know, that Azure carrot is being dangled as part of their enterprise agreement. And then the other thing is continued adoption of platform as a service offerings, right? There are so many out there and they are becoming so compelling. And I'm going to use the words operational burden again, but it reduces your operational burden. If I don't need to be a DBA and I can use this relational database service, or I can use this serverless service, right? And I don't need to write that much code anymore. I can let someone else manage all the infrastructure. If I can use EKS, I know what I want Kubernetes to do, but I don't need to manage any of the infrastructure that makes it do it, right? So these PaaS services are just becoming so shiny and so attractive. I think we're going to continue to see increased use of that. Now, obviously, that leads to a little bit of vendor lock-in. The more of those services you use, the tighter the handcuffs are. You could always pack up your stuff and move elsewhere, but it's not easy and it's not cheap, right? And that's so it behooves the service providers, the AWSs, the Azures of the world, to increase those PaaS offerings, because it does increase their stickiness.
All right. So bottom line there, platform as a service is a big differentiator.
It really, really is. I mean, gone are the days, you know, lowest common denominator, right? You got compute, network, and storage. Back in the day, 2012, 13, 14, it was every AWS reInvent conference you went to, or every Azure Ignite conference. Hey, we're slashing prices, right? It was all this race to the bottom on pricing. And then at some point they said, you know what, we can't cut prices anymore. We're kind of at the bare bones and a margin. So how else do we get folks to come here? We start adding these platform as a service offerings that are just super attractive. And like I said, reduce that operational burden, therefore increase the stickiness of my client.
Brian, fascinating stuff. I will certainly promote it. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise today.
I appreciate you again. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.